Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, the People's Democratic Party have officially brought their campaign to the British capital, hoping to woo the support from British lawmakers ahead of elections next month. Channel's Business Global was granted exclusive access to Atiku Abubakar and senior members of the PDP campaign as the political stalwart looks to cement his name in history by becoming leader of Africa's largest economy. And it took an epic battle and 15 rounds of voting for Kevin McCarthy to be elected the 55th Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. But at what cost? I'll be putting that question and more to the Vice Chair of External Relations for Republicans Overseas, Errol Moorcock, who will be joining me from Lake Tahoe in California. Then later we'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. But first, let's start the show with a story that continues to make headlines here in the UK and across the world. Health leaders across the country have warned that NHS strikes could intensify the risk to patients as they urge ministers to reach an agreement with trade unions as soon as possible. Members of the Royal College of Nursing walked out in December in a dispute over pay and patient safety, and they are set to strike again next week, Wednesday and Thursday. Here at Homerton Hospital in East London, members of the public believe now is the time for the government to act and meet the demands of striking workers.
I think the public mood, I don't know, I can't speak on behalf of the public, can I? I'm going to speak on behalf of myself, but I think it's different when you get inconvenienced for a train strike. People were pretty annoyed about that, if you look at the reasons for it, but I don't think anyone's on board with the idea of a nurse having to go to a food bank, which is just pretty outrageous. So it sounds like old Rishi's considering something, but I've worked in the NHS before, my family works in the NHS, so I'm a big fan of the NHS and what it does for the country. So it needs to work economically for the people who work in it, who dedicate a massive amount of their time to servicing the public, not for personal gain but for good of others. So it should stand up financially that that's a sustainable life choice. So if that's not, then it needs to be economically fixed.
Nobody's had a pay rise. I work in the public sector and we haven't had a pay rise. We've had like a 2% pay rise for the last 3 years. It seems to be a very sort of slightly vindictive approach, basically targeting certain sections of the NHS because they want to privatise it, because they don't think they haven't got the money to support it, and I just think I think most of the public are reasonably supportive of it all.
Definitely there is a problem with it's not enough bed, not enough space. Yes, definitely we're getting busy. Yes, not enough staff. Yes, not much people working in mental health hospitals. Yeah, they're struggling for beds and more stuff, yes. I can say for mental health...
As to be expected, the NHS strikes dominated the first parliamentary debate of the year in the House of Commons.
There's not a minimum level of service any day because they've broken the NHS.
But he talks about what's terrifying, Mr. Speaker. What's terrifying is right now. What's terrifying is that right now, people not knowing whether when they call 999, they will get the treatment that they need. Now, Mr. Speaker, in Australia and Canada and the US, they ban strikes on blue light services. We're not doing that. All we're saying is that in these emergency services, patients should be able to rely on a basic level of life-saving care. Why is he against that, Mr. Speaker?
Now to our next topic. Africa's largest economy is gearing up to elect a new leader on Saturday, February the 25th this year, waving goodbye to 8 years of leadership under President Muhammadu Buhari. The presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party, Atiku Abubakar, took his campaign and a significant number of his supporters to the British capital this week to meet with a series of British lawmakers, stakeholders, and even Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Channel's Business Global was granted access to meet and speak off camera with the political stalwart about his official visit to London, and I took time to speak on camera with senior members of the PDP Campaign Council about what's really at stake in the upcoming ballot.
We met with about 7 departmental heads and directors of government agencies in the UK, and it was a robust meeting. And we had very, very robust discussions on the economy, on defence, on security. We also have a lot of talk on immigration issues. It was a very, very great meeting. And in the entourage of the presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party, we had the chairman of the Presidential Campaign Council, Governor Udom Emmanuel. We had the Director General of the campaign, Amin Waziri Tambuwal. We had also the governor of Edo State was also present. The former governor of Kano, Shakarau, was present. We also had the former Senate President, Senator Bukola Saraki, was present in that meeting. And we had 3 professors who are members of our policy committee also went. And it was a very, very interesting, intriguing discussion with the British government today.
It is easy for developing partners to make comment and hold observation about countries. Another thing is for them to collaborate with those countries in strengthening the institutions so that those things don't have to happen again. The idea that something has happened before you then start thinking about solution cannot be as important as trying to prevent it. And he spoke from the presidential point of view in the sense that all of the issues were highlighted in our manifesto, which of course the greater part we have shared interest with the British government. He was able to open up with them. And the party PDP, historically he made the case with them that over the years since the return of democracy in 1999, PDP as a political party and the objectives and programs of PDP have largely impacted on the nation in terms of building democratic ideals, and institutions in the country. So it was very successful.
The level of migration of Nigerians coming overseas. When Obasanjo Atiku was there, it was a reverse case. Nigerians were asking, what the hell am I doing overseas? People wanted to get back to Nigeria. But presently, what is the case? Every young person wants to go, professionals, to the point that teachers want to leave. The academia, they're on strike. So it's a complete mismanagement of our diversity, what we've witnessed. And there is some level of, it's inexplicable why people would even, you talk about it, and people will respond. It's inexplicable.
His Excellency Atiku then, as a Vice President, being the chairman of the National Economic Council, had experience as a public servant. He was in the Nigerian Customs and he rose to a level that he voluntarily left service. Now, you see where experience comes. Otherwise, it wasn't difficult for him to situate and fit in as a chairman and discharge that functions to the credibility of everybody, to the benefit of Nigeria. The economy was booming. Nigeria was one of the fastest growing economies until 2007. I believe you understand what I'm talking about. If you agree with me, 2007, late Musa Yaradua came on board. We continued in that same trajectory. Petroleum, social welfare, the economy, all the variables, because the primary responsibility of every governance is welfare and security of the people. In that template, PDP government thrived in that.
Well, for more insights into the importance of Nigerian political diaspora discourse, I'm now being joined by Emeka Ndubuisi, the Diaspora Director for the Atiku Support Organisation. Emeka joins me from Houston in Texas. Emeka Ndubuisi, thank you so much for joining me on the show. So clearly quite a large delegation of your party were in London this week. Why is diaspora engagement so important to this election?
Yeah, thank you very much, Gillian, for having me. The diaspora engagement is very, very important. The role of diaspora in the nation building cannot be overemphasized. So you see, sometime in October, His Excellency was in US at the instance of the State Department and White House. And this week, he's in London in continuation of that engagement. So you see diasporans, they contribute immensely to the nation building when it comes to diaspora remittance. And, a cluster of people like that needs to be part of what is going on in the system when you talk about processes, how to make things better in the country. So His Excellency is, busy making sure that he's engaging them, getting the brains, the experts, because a lot of diasporans are pretty much experts in their own enclaves, and they want to come back and, give back to the country. And also one other thing is that diasporans, when you look at them, like for the last past 3 years now, they'll be remitting nothing less than 20 billion and above every year to Nigeria. So you want to bring them, their stakeholders, you want to bring them on board, you want to see how they can come together and rub minds and make that country a better place.
Emeka Ndubuisi, the Diaspora Director, Atiku Support Organisation. I know there are several other titles, but we'll keep that one for now. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Juliana.
Let's pivot away from politics, shall we, to focus our minds on the trillion-dollar pharmaceutical sector. Cough medicine tainted with harmful substances that killed at least 19 children in Uzbekistan late last year has once again revealed lax oversight and regulation of pharmaceutical companies based not only in India but across the world. According to the African Development Bank, Africa imports more than 70% of the medicines it needs at the cost of $14 billion annually. This, as well as many other reasons, has led the group to launch a new initiative that will join hands with the African Union to boost the continent's capacity to produce drugs, vaccines, diagnostics and therapeutics all along the value chain. This is to help build its pharmaceutical sector. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Padmashree Gail Sampath, Special Advisor to the African Development Bank Group and President for Pharmaceuticals and Health Infrastructure. Padmashree joins me from Paris. Padmashree Gail Sampath, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global today. So the Director General of the World Health Organization said in a quote, establishing the African Pharmaceutical Technology Foundation by the AFDB is a game changer. Can you tell us why?
That's absolutely right. It's a game changer because African companies have struggled in the past, particularly during the HIV/AIDS crisis, but not necessarily only then, to produce drugs. They've also struggled to gain markets. And one of the key impediments for the African pharmaceutical sector in being able to produce competitively has been technology. So establishing such a regional agency, which is dedicated solely to promote technology in the continent, is going to be a game changer.
Absolutely, it's fundamental. Just a shame we didn't have this in place during the pandemic. Previous global efforts to manufacture pharmaceuticals, they've always met stumbling blocks. What's changed?
So one thing is for sure, COVID-19 has shown us that it's not enough just to be able to produce globally. If you don't have regional production capacity, you're always going to suffer. Because even if you have an excess globally, it might not always trickle down to being made available in your region, particularly when you're a low-income country in Africa at the same time in the same way. That's very important for us to bear in mind. The other thing that's changed really is that we've come to realize that the way we've been sort of thinking about supply in Africa is entirely wrong. In the past, we've always sort of gone with the thinking that so long as we can get someone to supply at the cheapest rate, it's okay. This is the kind of thinking that basically led us to supplying the cheapest cost antiretroviral drugs to Africa at the cost of local production. This is something we can't do. We can't externalize this anymore. Africa cannot afford to externalize this.
Absolutely. Well, it's a great initiative and very timely, considering we are hearing that there could potentially be further variants coming out of China. So we need to make sure that we are secure on the continent. Padmashree Gail Sampath, Special Advisor to the African Development Bank Group, President for Pharmaceuticals and Health Infrastructure. What a portfolio. Thank you so much for joining me, Professor.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.
In a moment, I'll be examining the congressional chaos that engulfed Washington last week. But until then, here's Teniola Oyetayo with a breakdown of the biggest business news stories of the week. Britain's financial watchdog has fined the UK subsidiary of Nigeria's Guarantee Trust Bank £7.6 million for what it said were further failures in its anti-money laundering systems and controls. The Financial Conduct Authority says these weaknesses were repeatedly highlighted to GT Bank by internal and external sources, but despite this, the bank failed to take appropriate action to fix them. According to the FCA, GT Bank has not disputed the findings and agreed to settle. UK retailers have reported soaring growth over Christmas, with Tesco, Marks & Spencer and Sainsbury's all reporting strong results. Tesco said like-for-like sales at its UK stores rose by 5.3%, while M&S's grew by 7.2%. Sainsbury's saw like-for-like sales, excluding fuel, up 5.9%. The strong performance adds to evidence that shoppers were determined to spend at Christmas, despite inflation running at 10.7%. Virgin Orbit's shares fell after the US-based company confirmed on Monday that its first launch out of the United Kingdom failed to reach orbit after suffering what it described as an anomaly. The mission had been billed as a major milestone for the UK space industry. And hundreds of flights in the United States were delayed on Wednesday after the computer system that alerts pilots of potential hazards failed, forcing all flights to be grounded for hours. As of late afternoon, nearly 1,300 flights to, from, or within the US had been cancelled, and nearly 9,000 were delayed, according to tracking site FlightAware. Teniola Uyitayo for Channels Business Global. Thanks, Tenny. Now to our next topic. It took an epic battle, but ultimately, after an unprecedented 15 rounds of voting, Kevin McCarthy was elected the 55th Speaker of the United States House of Representatives. It was the first time a Speaker has not been elected on the first ballot since 1923, and the first time the election has taken more than 9 ballots since 1859. US President Joe Biden said the standoff was embarrassing, as winning the Speaker's chair required McCarthy to surrender to the hardliners who had initially voted against him. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Errol Moorcock, the Vice Chair of External Relations for Republicans Overseas. Errol joins me from Lake Tahoe in California. Errol Moorcock, it's a pleasure to be speaking with you on Channels Business Global again. You're going to have to break this down for me. 15 rounds of voting, many expletives in op-eds, which obviously I can't repeat. Why was Kevin McCarthy's election as House Speaker so chaotic?
Well, it was so chaotic because the Republican Party is, in its core essence now, a very big tent. And we have ideologies that are broad spectrum. And the core of the Freedom Caucus that was blocking Mr. McCarthy from the speakership, headed by Matt Gaetz, were people who had been removed from committees, people who definitely during the prior Democrat rule in the House had been marginalized. And they definitely wanted to make sure they had their voice heard, and they had the votes to do that. So the Republican Party was forced to negotiate, vote, negotiate, vote, negotiate, vote. The last time this happened, more than one vote, was 1923. So it's, but that is actually 100 years ago. And as Voltaire said, history doesn't repeat, but man does. And I think this was just maybe a healthier thing than it looked like. It was a disaster for us optically. We looked bad as a party, but the American people also doesn't look good. But in the end, it was a healthy process, and the controversy that came around was ultimately worked out, even though it was kind of a joke, we can say, along the way.
Joke is a good term. You said it worked out. We're just going to have to wait and see. It's only been a week since he's been in place, hasn't it? I suppose over the past, 8 years now, there's only one name really that's dominated the Republican Party, Donald Trump. So we don't know much about Kevin McCarthy. MSNBC described him earlier this week as a good case study in bad governance. Why is he such a controversial figure?
Well, that MSNBC article, was core focused on, the fact that he didn't want to impeach Trump, that he wasn't with the Green New Deal and this kind of stuff. That was actually, that's governance that our party wants. So that article, we do remember it. He's controversial because a lot of people on the Trump wing of the party do not see him as one of their guys, even though Donald Trump himself said he's one of, I want you to vote for him. So you have the fact that he's seen as an insider, he's seen as a establishment Republican, and we now have that new faction that's gaining traction. And he was able to kind of work with the situation. I think Donald Trump really does like Kevin McCarthy. So there is some, let's say, communication there that shows that McCarthy does have standing in this sort of new Republican Party. But I think it just comes down to the fact that they wanted a Jim Jordan. They wanted somebody who was really on the ideological right. And McCarthy's much more of a deal maker. And he's the kind of guy that we need in there to bring in the voters in Virginia. We don't need the voters in Florida and Alabama. We've got those guys. They have to understand that we have a big tent. It's 50 states. And, McCarthy was the guy in the end. And we're quite happy to finally have him as our speaker.
Well, you would like to have some updates from you as his tenure continues. Errol Moorcock, Vice Chair of External Relations, Republicans Overseas. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Now to our final topic. The royal family are never out of the headlines these days. And this year, everyone is talking about the fastest selling non-fiction book ever, Spare, written by Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry. I still need to order my copy. Away from the scandal, though, typically in the first few weeks of January, Buckingham Palace Discourse is reserved for celebrating those who have received New Year's honours. The 2023 recognitions were the first to be issued by King Charles III, with a range of politicians and charity workers being rewarded for their hard work. UN Goodwill Ambassador and serial entrepreneur Mavis Amankwa is one of the recipients, and she joined me earlier on in the studio to discuss her monumental success. Mavis Amankwa, BEN, Honourable, Your Excellency. And I say that not trying to cause a joke, but I know that you are incredibly well connected in Ghana, where you hail from. And of course, you have been one of the lucky few to be the first to receive a New Year's honours by King Charles III. Talk to me about why you received it, how you received it, when you got the news, and congratulations, of course.
Thank you so much. So it wasn't surprising, because I think it was a long time coming, and I think a lot of people were expecting me to have this honour years ago, because I've been running business and doing entrepreneurship for over 20 years. So when the opportunity came, everyone was like, this has been long awaited. When I heard the news, obviously I couldn't say much, so I had to keep it really quiet. And it was, you know when you're just so excited to tell, but you just have to be quiet. And I was just over the moon. When I told my mum was so excited. She was like, hey, I'm going to Buckingham Palace. That was the first thing she said. And I just said to myself, I'm actually quite happy, because when you're helping the community, working on entrepreneurship, working on business, and people have so many challenges, and you're that person that helps them, it's a really good feeling. So to get this honour after like 20 years, I say I'm really, really happy and excited.
You have been doing it for quite a while, but the entrepreneurship landscape has changed. How has it changed? The kind of work you started doing 20 years ago to what you're doing this year?
I think, first of all, technology has come a long way. When I first started business, it was about fax machines and the good old telephones, and now everything's just digital. You can literally use your phone to do everything. So for me, I'm born in an age where technology wasn't, it wasn't great then, it was just kind of coming into play. So over the last 2 decades, I've seen a change in technology. I've seen a change in the way people do business now. You could do business just even on WhatsApp, Instagram, social media, and I've had to get used to that kind of way of doing business. The old-fashioned, let's put a letter in the post and let's have face-to-face has changed. Obviously, we've got the virtual, and I think there's quite a lot of benefits to it. But every time I think to myself, what more can come of doing business, virtually, online? Technology is so amazing, and it gives you those global connections and networks as well.
BEM, Your Honourable Excellency, thank you so much. And given the socio-economic gloomy backdrop that we have in the UK in the moment, it's fantastic to end this business show on a positive note. Congratulations once again.
Thank you for having me, Juliana. Thank you.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.